The Zelda series has always had a huge impact on the gaming industry, and Splatoon is no exception to that. So today we're going to be looking at bosses across the Splatoon games that have been inspired by Zelda bosses. So let's get to work. First up is Octomaw from Splatoon 1. At first glance, this might not seem too similar to anything in Zelda. The attack pattern of the boss is pretty simple. It swims through the ink before disappearing. It then opens its mouth under the player, surrounding them with teeth. These teeth have to be destroyed with either bombs or the splatter shot to escape from being eaten. Here's the first reference. When fighting BLIZZETA in Twilight Princess, she drops ice crystals around Link before falling in the center. The only way to escape is to break the crystals before being struck. Once the crystals are destroyed, they don't return until Link deals damage to her. Replace the ice with teeth, and replace getting crushed with getting eaten, and there you have Octomaws. But wait, there's more. Once escaping from the Octomaw's maw, we have another Zelda reference. This time, it's none other than the King Dodongo from Ocarina of Time. In Zelda, the boss opens its mouth, drawing in air before attempting to breathe fire at Link. So that part isn't so similar, but the way you fight the boss is identical. That's right, throwing a bomb into its mouth. The difference between the two is that the teeth need to be knocked out prior to throwing the bomb into its mouth in Splatoon. Otherwise, it plays out just the same. Throw the bomb in and attack when the boss is stunned. Do that 3 times and you finish the boss. Next up, we have the Octoshower from Splatoon 2. This one kept seeming so familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. The boss is held up by enemies. It uses a variety of attacks, such as using a charger, splatling, and a stinger. Dodge those attacks and shoot the enemies holding it up. What boss from a Zelda game is being suspended in the air and needs knocked down to the ground to attack it? Puppet Ganon from Wind Waker. The boss is being held up by strings. In Zelda, the boomerang is used to cut the strings. Once the tail is on the ground, it can be shot to damage the boss. Much the same, Octoshower needs to be knocked down to the ground before the weak point is exposed. I was a little bit torn on this one because there is another reference that I think is worth mentioning. Barinade from Ocarina of Time is already potentially the inspiration for Puppet Ganon, as well as having a similar attack to the stinger. Nevertheless, there is a mechanic for severing it from the ceiling before it can be attacked, so this one inspired the Octoshower one way or the other. The big difference is in how the boss never reattaches its tentacles to the ceiling and begins to spin around instead. So while there are major differences with how the boss is eventually defeated, the Octoshower does have influences from this boss. And before we move on to the final boss, we need to talk about KALLE Deimos from Wind Waker. This one is certainly inspired by Barinade from Ocarina of Time. We already talked about how this type of mechanic works, but I wanted to point out that the opening cinematic is very reminiscent to what happens to the Zapfish in Splatoon when a boss is encountered. Makar is seen standing inside what looks like a large flower. Once Link approaches the boss, the head pops up and eats Makar. The cinematic in Splatoon plays out almost exactly the same when the Zapfish is captured. So we can really say that KALLE Deimos inspired every boss in Splatoon in a small way. We saved the best for last, DJ Octavio. He appears in all 3 games and each appearance is dripping with Zelda influences. We'll start at the beginning with the Splatoon 1 fight. So right off the bat, we can see a lot of Bongo from Ocarina of Time. The Octobot that he's piloting has 2 fists that attack the player. To defeat the boss, the hands must be attacked much like the fight in Ocarina. When the hands are fired at the player, doing enough damage to them will result in them being reflected back at the boss. This is another reference. The mechanic is awfully similar to the Ganondorf fight, also in Ocarina of Time. Ganondorf launches a magical attack at Link, which can be reflected back. We do have a minor difference between Octavio and Ganondorf. The fists are not ever volleyed back at the player. The energy from Ganondorf is. Hold on though, because Octavio has another trick up his sleeve. In the second phase of the fight, he launches a missile that needs to be attached to damage the boss. This is where the 2 fights line up exactly. Octavio will indeed volley the missile back at the player until it has been deflected 3 times, resulting in damage to the Octobot. Splatoon 2 has many of the same influences. Some of the attacks vary with this fight, but the main process for fighting the boss is very similar. Phase 2 of this fight is borrowed largely from the STALLORD fight in Twilight Princess. There are 2 rings of spinner rails which Link can jump between to avoid attacks. While the fight still consists of knocking the fists back at Octavio, the player also has to switch rails to avoid the spinning punches. Once each is damaged enough, return to the ground to deal the final blow. And we'll finish up with Splatoon 3. Again, the fight is mostly similar to the first two fights. Unlike those games, this is not the final boss, so you might notice it's a bit easier. It's notable that the fists are no longer connected with a cable, resembling Bongo even more than before. He sometimes attacks with an open hand from above, so the attacks are actually even more similar than before too. But the big change here is that he'll use an ink vac to keep your shots from being able to deal damage to his hands. And how do you combat that? By throwing small fry and clogging the ink vac. Haven't I seen this before? That's right, we're back to throwing a bomb into a mouth, just like in the King Dodongo fight. So by Splatoon 3, Octavio has been inspired by 4 different Zelda boss fights. So that's my list. These are the bosses that have too many similarities for it to just be a coincidence. Given how impactful the Zelda series has been on gaming as a whole, it's really no surprise to find bosses with similar mechanics in Splatoon. And I'm sure there are even more that I missed, so let me know if there are any you can think of in the comments. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you want, I hope you enjoyed it, and, as always, good luck, and good Splatooning!